Hello and welcome to Inside Modular, the podcast of commercial modular construction brought to you by the Modular Building Institute. Welcome, everyone. My name is John McMullen. I'm the marketing director here at MBI. Today, I'm joined by Chris Anderson, CEO at Vantem. Chris is here to talk about how Vantem, an international modular manufacturer, is working with developers in the U.S. and abroad to sidestep industry barriers and build more modular housing. Chris, welcome.
Hi, John. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So tell me about yourself, Chris. What's your background and what led you to Vantem?
So I'm a serial entrepreneur, I guess, because Vantem is the second company that I started. Co-founded a prior company before this where we did sustainably harvested wood products, mostly construction products that we were shipping all over the world. And the technology, the idea for Vantem really was born out of that company. So when we sold it, we kept that intellectual property and idea behind, and started our Vantem venture.
How would you describe Vantem to someone who really isn't familiar with the company?
So we leverage a proprietary technology that allows us to build very, very energy efficient modular structures, and we leverage it to build affordable, energy efficient modular single family homes and multifamily homes, working together with developers where we really focus on solving the two biggest problems they have, which are cost problems and financing problems for their projects. And we do that leveraging that energy efficiency that we have.
I know Vantem has a broad portfolio. You sort of alluded to it just a second ago. A broad portfolio internationally, single family homes, multifamily buildings, hotels, schools. But let's talk about the system that you mentioned that you use to build these structures, that proprietary system that you've got. What can you tell me about that technology? How has it evolved over the years, and what advantages does it offer?
So the core of our technology is a proprietary structural panel. It's a structural insulated panel that's made with a special ceramic facing on both sides and a insulation material in the middle. The way that it's made makes that panel very, very structural. So it doesn't really require additional wood or steel to support weight and structure. And the other thing is that because it's a ceramic facing, there are a lot of other attributes that the panel has, which is weatherability. It doesn't grow mold. It's fire resistant and so forth. So what we do is we deploy that panel to build modular products where the panel is used on the exterior envelope of the single family home or the multifamily, giving it all those attributes I mentioned, strength, weatherability, but especially energy efficiency, because it's a much, much more energy efficient way to build. The panel, since it doesn't have any extra wood or steel in it, it ends up when we use it to build the entire envelope of a structure. You can think of it a lot like an ice box, right? So it's a complete insulated structural envelope on the outside that's not interrupted by any wood or steel. So an extremely effective way to hit very high energy efficiency ratings.
Let's focus on Vantem's approach to single family modular. You mentioned that just a second ago. That's your primary market here in the U.S. Is that right?
It is currently. We our first factory that we actually acquired and converted in southern Georgia, Affinity, is a single family factory. So that is what we're producing today. We are bringing a plant online in September that is specifically aimed at multifamily, and we'll be really at that point with the rest of the rollout that we're doing. We'll be covering single family, multifamily, and a very strong emphasis on senior living, which obviously is just a variant of multifamily.
Very exciting. Where's that factory going to be in the U.S.?
It's in South Carolina, so it's
Okay.
right on the South Carolina-North Carolina border.
Nice. How would you describe what you're doing differently from other national home manufacturers? I mean, you've got your panel technology. Are there other factors that you bring in to play that make your single family residences different than the other modular structures that people are building?
Yeah, so the core difference is that panel and what it lets us do in terms of very high energy efficiency, right? The homes that we build and the apartments that we will be building can hit the highest ratings, like zero energy ready or full net zero, which is the gold and the platinum standard for energy efficiency. And we can do it at a cost that's much lower than anybody else because this panel allows us to. Now, what's unique in our case is that we're deploying this into a complete ecosystem. So Vantem is not just a modular manufacturer. We also essentially are a complete one-stop shop for the developer, where we bring the entire solution, the set, the stitch. We bring the contracting element into it when needed, and most importantly, we bring the financing for the projects, which we're able to do at costs and at leverage ratios that are much more favorable because of that energy efficiency.
So tell me about how you work with developers. What's that process like for both for you and for them?
So we have a number of different kinds of developers, but most of them are just really high quality developers that have wonderful projects in terms of a great piece of land, a great concept, and that's usually where we come into the picture. So we'll take a look at what the developer's plan is for that site, and then do all of the architecture engineering to modular. Also, then structure the financing for that project. Currently, most of the projects that we're taking on are projects that have been sitting on the shelf because the costs may not work, right? Because site building costs have been increasing tremendously. So they don't pencil on a cost basis, or increasingly they don't work out from a financing standpoint because banks have retracted, and the developer's not able to borrow as much as they were able to borrow before. We solve both of those problems, right? So greenlighting essentially projects that otherwise are on the shelf.
What is Vantem able to offer developers in terms of time savings and finance options?
Right. So, all modular, well executed, provides great time savings, right? That's well known. A project that might take 2 years otherwise, we're able to do in 8 to 12 months, for example, on multifamily, because of the modular component. What's unique to Vantem is, again, we solve all of the other problems that developers sometimes have, particularly developers that haven't worked with modular in the past, right? And we all know there are a lot of developers that haven't had the best experience because, in my view, in our view, there are some unique skill sets, some unique understanding of how you have to structure a project for it to be successful in modular, right? And we're able to kind of partner real closely and hold our partner's hand through the process, make sure that the specification and scope of work, for example, for the site work is done properly for modular. It's not the same, right, as a normal scope of work. And so through that, plus our really efficient modular build that's kind of juiced by this panel that we talked about, we're able to dial back the costs that on these projects to maybe what they were looking at for site building 2, 3, 4 years ago. So there's a cost reduction by going with us, and we make sure that cost reduction actually happens because we're in control of the project all the way through, the turnkey aspect of it, right? Then on the other side, from a financing standpoint, what we're able to do is also dial the clock back to what developers like to see, which is being able to borrow for their project somewhere around 75 to 80% of the project cost. Whereas today, as most folks know, banks have retracted to the point where they're only lending 50, 55. Developers feel really, fortunate if they're getting 60%. Well, what we're able to do is work with that, but then overlay on top of it additional green finance that plugs in and gets you back up to that 75 to 80%. Additionally, we are able to bring in equity into the projects where needed, also juiced by the energy efficiency of what we do, because we have investors that are interested in investing into energy efficient green projects, right? So we're able to bring in some equity that's well priced to the projects as well when it's needed.
You mentioned as part of your response just now, green financing. What does that mean exactly?
Well, at its core, what it is investors of all kinds, from pension funds to maybe family offices, that are looking to invest in ecologically responsible or energy efficient carbon mitigated projects, right?
Gotcha.
That's there is quite a lot of capital out there looking to invest in these kind of projects, both as debt and as equity. And there aren't a lot of projects that really are certified and can actually deliver on that promise of being quote green. So what we're doing really is linking our projects to those investor bases that we have and sources of financing from specialty banks and bond issuers, things of that nature, that essentially let us do what I just described.
Gotcha. So these green financing options, they come in and they're used in combination with these other forms of the financing and equity and all these to allow the project to come to fruition. Is that right?
Exactly. So
Okay.
we'll take, the project usually might, have already a bank for the senior debt that maybe they're only lending 50%. So then we'll bring in another 25 to 30% of green financing, green debt to get back up to that 75, 80%. And usually the developers are putting in the land as equity. And if they don't, maybe the project doesn't have enough equity in it, that's where we bring in the investors that put in the balance of the equity.
Gotcha. Vantem, I was reading on your website and some other places in preparation for this interview. Vantem has just completed some work with a large developer in Florida. I think it was Trinity Development Partners, I think it was. What can you tell me about that project?
So we've got actually several projects with Trinity, a really good specialty developer in Florida, as you said. The one that we just structured and will begin production in September is a project that actually started out as townhomes, but that when we went in and analyzed it together with that developer, we figured out that it would make more sense to restructure that as a senior living option because the numbers work better and the financing that we'd be able to bring to the table was better. Our partner developer at Trinity, they loved it, and so the project has been converted to a senior living project. So that's kind of an example of the type of analysis that we bring to the table, and then of course we do the rest in terms of the engineering, the architecture, and finalize the financing for that package.
In addition to the work you guys are doing here in the US, Vantem, I know, does work internationally. Tell me about what
Mm-hmm.
you've been able to learn from these different operations and what, if any, best practices have you been able to apply here in the US from your projects around the world?
Yeah, so we started our rollout here in the U.S. Now about 2 years ago, and the rollout is based on what we learned in our initial international rollout, which was largely in South America. Part of that is just all of the body of testing that we developed over now almost 15 years, a body of products that I think, as you mentioned before, range from single family homes into multifamily and hotel and even educational facilities. That process that we went through of rolling out the product and our concept overseas first let us really flex our muscles and experiment a lot, right? So we did a lot of different types of projects, and I think we're able to really identify that as we came into the US, our sweet spot is, as I said before, single family, multifamily, specifically that 4-story up to 4-story multifamily or 5-story on a podium, and senior living. That's really where we're focused, and the reason that determination was made is all of that experience that we had over the prior 15 years or so.
What's your take on the state of the single family modular housing market here in the US? You say you've been doing it a couple of years, you guys acquired Affinity. In your experience, is it mirroring the commercial side of the industry, or do you see any differences? What's your take on that?
I mean, I think there are a few common threads, but we see it as quite different. And I'll talk more about the opportunity set that we see. The opportunity set that we see in single family is affordable single family. And frankly, all of the opportunity sets that we're focused on are the affordable side, right? So the housing shortage that there is in the US is phenomenal. It's huge, but the majority of that shortage is on that bottom third of the price spectrum that has become really hard for traditional developers and traditional builders to make money on, right? I mean, construction costs, particularly driven by labor cost increases have driven just the price points of building a square foot of decent housing beyond what is accessible to most people. And I think the opportunity set for modular in general is that we have less labor hours per unit of production than site building, right? I mean, that's why Henry Ford decided to build cars on an assembly line rather than continue to build them in garages. Same thing for modular. We build in a factory, so we're able to control labor and control costs. So, we're bringing that cost savings to the single family home market, so enabling sales at prices that actually are affordable. So there may be gluts in certain areas which are particularly higher priced areas, just like you have gluts in commercial. But when you're really focused on that bottom third of the cost pyramid, the demand is I mean, it's almost infinite.
So why hasn't the adoption of single family modular homes been greater, do you think? What's holding it back?
Well, I think that the two biggest issues are that there aren't a lot of companies in the modular space that are offering a full turnkey product and a full turnkey project. They still, I think most or many companies see themselves as a super sub to a project and feel that the extent of what they need to deliver is a product to the job site and maybe with the set, right? But what ends up happening is because we're just such a small part of the market, less than 5%, right, overall, most developers don't have any experience in the modular space. So when you leave them kind of to invent how to incorporate the modular into their traditional projects, a lot of times it doesn't go well, right? So it's not uncommon to talk to developers that tried it and say, oh boy, those cost savings that I was promised look good on paper, but they didn't materialize, right? That's a common theme. You hear it over and over again. Well, the reason is that middle space of how to execute a modular project, or what others call a hybrid project, well, by scoping the work well, costing it out well, and supervising it well, doesn't always happen. And that's where the momentum stops. Is if you don't have great success on projects, of course, people aren't going to continue doing it. And you see that unfortunately quite often.
So what's the best way for a residential developer who's interested in modular, who wants to use it? What's the best way for them to get started? What process should they follow?
Well, I think the most successful projects are where the developer is flexible, right? And really works with the modular supplier on all aspects of making sure that the project, what they have in mind for the product, really makes sense for modular, number one. Number two, that the entire project is conceptualized in a way that you can maximize those efficiencies, right? So I might answer your question a little bit differently. What I don't think is a great idea is for a developer to fully develop a project with the engineered drawings and concrete specifications that they want before engaging the modular supplier. It's too late. Mm-hmm. You really need to partner early and make sure that the design process, the engineering process, the whole concept is done in a way that you absolutely maximize the efficiencies of modular. And in those cases, you will see those benefits if it's executed all the way through, if the follow through is there.
What's next for Vantem? We've talked about a new factory coming online in South Carolina, work in Florida. Mm-hmm. Seems a lot of your work is in the Southeast. Can we expect Vantem to be in California, Washington soon? What are your plans?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we are focused tightly on our rollout in the Southeast first. So our goal is to put in place about 5 factories in the Southeast in the next couple of years. And next year, we're going to begin the analysis of which is the next area that we're going to expand to. But our goal is over the next 7 years to have 20 plants across the U.S. covering all the major markets. And California will be one of them, as you asked about specifically.
Well, yeah, I just know they have talk about a glut for housing. They need they need all they can get.
Especially on the affordable side, right?
This has been great. I really appreciate your time. It sounds like Vantem is doing all the right things, and I'm excited to see how you guys progress.
Thank you so much. A real pleasure. Appreciate the interest.
My name is John McMullen. This has been another episode of Inside Modular, the podcast of commercial modular construction. Until next time.